Morning, everybody. Helen, Paul, Cushman, and Wakefield here for another fun episode of the Industrial Revolution podcast. Today we've got Zach Miller, VP of Government Affairs at TANI, which is the Trucking Association of New York. Zach, thanks for coming on today. Tell us a little bit about your background and most importantly about all the great advocacy work that TANI does.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation. There is a reason why I don't have hair on my head, and that is because, I work for the trucking industry in the state and city of New York, which is, a fight every day. We are a member-based industry trade group. We have advocating, for the whole state. About 70% of our members are what we would call trucking companies or fleets, and about 30% are industry service providers, which could be anything from insurance or safety technology or legal. And that's actually how I got into this industry. So my father is a traffic lawyer. Trucking companies are his main clientele. When I was in high school and college, I would do all his paperwork, his invoicing. I would prepare New York City parking tickets, which used to be a whole thing. They could make movies about what that used to be like. But I always, at a very young age, had an understanding of the regulatory challenges that faced our industry, and always appreciated advocating for them. And I'm fortunate enough to have turned that into a career.
Terrific. Well, thanks again for coming on. We're going to cut right to the chase and talk about some of the big regulatory issues and the challenges with operating specifically in New York City. I know you run the whole state, but we're here in Manhattan today. It's near and dear to us.
We're in the CBZ.
Exactly. So we're coming off a big week with a lot of regulations getting rolled back in Congress. How is that impacting what's happening here in the city? And educate us a little bit on what's happening there.
This has been one of the biggest challenges we've had for the last at least year, maybe year and a half, which is specifically the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule, which was one of the CARB, the California Air Resources Board regulations that Congress just rolled back. And we're awaiting signature by the president to fully eliminate that. So the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule it's very, very complicated, but it's a sales mandate for electric vehicles. And there's a sales percentage year over year, and it goes by vehicle class. So, for heavier vehicles, there's less of a mandate. For lighter vehicles, there is more, sales percentage. But it was this incredibly unwieldy regulation. It is a manufacturer regulation. So those are the OEMs where you see, the brands on the truck, Volvo, Mack, Freightliner, whatever. The thing is, with one exception, OEMs do not sell directly to customers. Dealers sell to customers. So basically, dealers buy from the OEMs and then sell them to their customers. So dealers were absolutely getting squeezed by this regulation because the OEMs, for the most part, made a business decision that I think is, you may agree or disagree, but they made an understandable business decision of, we're not going to make diesel equipment available because we don't want to incur penalties for this ACT. So customers were trying to place orders with their dealers for equipment that was not available. So it really shut down truck sales in the state of New York and in these other states that adopted the ACT regulation. So electric vehicles weren't moving. Diesel vehicles, which the newest vehicles are incredibly clean, incredibly efficient. The industry has done an amazing job eliminating the NOx and the diesel particulates and really cleaning up the air. One truck, I always get this wrong because I can't say it properly, but it's basically like one truck from the 1980s emits the same as 60 trucks today. I mean, that's how cleaner diesel has gotten. But that stuff wasn't moving. So what was moving were used trucks that are less safe, less efficient, but that's what people were able to get. And the challenge is, there are a lot of challenges when it comes to electrification, particularly for your heavy-duty vehicles, your Class 7, your Class 8 vehicles that are over the road, that, that hours are drivers operate under very strict hours of service. So, to have to sit and charge a vehicle for an extended period of time will absolutely wipe out their hours of service. But that's just assuming they have a place they can charge. There is no publicly available commercial charging in the state of New York. New York had a massive thruway renovation program. They installed charging for passenger vehicles, not for commercial vehicles. So even companies that are interested in electrification, that wanted to dip their toe in and buy electric vehicles, had no place to charge them other than their own terminals, and there are a whole host of challenges with that, some of which you can understand, which is that a lot of times these people don't own their terminals, and the landlords may not be too interested in putting in heavy-duty charging, at least at this stage in the technology. So the ACT was a completely unworkable mandate. It was really crippling this industry, and so we were glad to see Congress take the steps that they took. There is, in the 70s, it may have made sense for California, where their air quality was in such a state, to get some of the waivers that the EPA granted them, like Congress granted them, but those days are gone. And it is unacceptable for a state like California to dictate policy to other states. We need a federal standard, not a state piecemeal. Look, we are interstate commerce. And it's, especially in the Northeast, these trucks go over multiple jurisdictions throughout the day. And emissions don't really respect state lines. So we need federal guidance, not California guidance. And I think this was the first step in the federal government sort of taking back some of the power that they gave away to California decades ago.
Great segue, and I think you touched on it a little bit in your last statement there, but this is a really great representation of policy that has kind of unintended consequences. And what I wanted to get at, and what I was going to ask you next, was it seems like in earnest there is a bit of a desire to electrify, but in New York City in particular, we have a really big infrastructure issue with lack of EV-ready fleet charging sites, inability, backlog, slow cadence to get interconnect. Tell us a little bit about what's going on with there and how we can help.
100%. And I do want to say, we are not opposed to electrification. We are, as a trade group, we're technology and sort of fueling agnostic. We want our members to have every option available to them, and we want them to make the decision that best fits with their operational and financial needs. So we are in favor of electrification where it makes sense. Where does it make sense? Urban areas. Last mile urban delivery, where the vehicles are smaller and they don't travel as many distances, it's a far better application for electric vehicles. And we're starting to see that sort of map out on paper, where fleets have been able to sort of run profitable electric routes in New York City. Now, these are bigger companies, better capitalized, but again, early adopters, that's kind of what happens. So, but you raised a great point. We have a lot of challenges when it comes to grid upgrades, infrastructure upgrades, installation, which is also very costly. It's one thing to say, hey, let's just use a Sprinter van as example. It's like, well, a diesel or a gas-powered Sprinter van costs this, an electric costs this, but I also get some incentives back, so I could probably make this work. And then you look at what it's going to cost to install the charging, if Con Ed is even able to hook it up, or if they're even able to hook it up in a timeline that matches your needs. These are the challenges that have not been addressed. I do want to give a lot of credit, particularly to Con Ed and National Grid, for doing so much planning and so much prep work and submitting really viable proposals to the state. But look, all of this takes time, all of it, and we're not there yet. And I think that if there is a better understanding that, hey, we're not there yet, but if we can find a way to really nurture those segments where electrification makes sense and focus on that from a infrastructure and power and incentive framework, we can start to put more electric vehicles on the road. But that would mean the state would have to say, we're going to ignore the heavy stuff for now. We're really over the road, Class 7, Class A vehicles, we're not going to look to electrify. We're going to look at other solutions, be they biodiesel, CNG, renewable diesel, really great options for that segment. And let's kind of work with all these stakeholders to figure out a path forward for electrification for these smaller, lighter vehicles that don't travel very far in a day.
Really focusing on the hyper infill geography,
Exactly.
maybe last mile to middle mile, but it's really that,
It's really that.
final block, and we're talking about small vehicles,
Yep.
Sprinter vans, et cetera.
Exactly. Exactly.
Which is kind of ironic, because when we think about where there have been technology advancements with like long haul trucking, autonomous vehicles, et cetera, those are really largely outside New York City.
New York City is always going to present a challenge in so many different facets, right? Between just like the regulatory environment, between the fact that we have so many people here. And we like to talk about density and urban density, which is true, but New York is also very spread out. Like we were talking before the podcast started, but good luck getting from Astoria to Coney Island. It's incredibly complicated. You take half your day trying to do that. But logistically, there are companies that have to figure out how to get freight to both Astoria and Coney Island in the same day. Incredibly, incredibly challenging. And so I think that if there is more prioritization given to logistics and to delivery, while incorporating things like electrification into that, we'd be able to manage these challenges a little bit better than we do now, where it's really kind of haphazard and things. I think there are some grand ideas in play, but they're difficult. I would never say impossible, but very difficult for industry to be able to meet. And it's also important to note, this industry operates on very slim profit margins, typically 1.5% to 2%. And in the regulatory and taxation climate in New York City, that gets even lower. So every single day a truck is on the road in New York City, there's money flying out the door, and companies are trying to keep themselves afloat here. These are the logistical challenges that every company you see on the road in New York City is dealing with day in and day out.
So good segue again into the next topic when we talk about margins and this theory that we spoke about earlier, or not theory, the reality that freight follows demand. When you talk about the indirect source rule and you talk about trying to push out warehousing out of the urban core, what is the impact and what's the real impact?
That's exactly it. And that's such a great point, because when you see a truck on the road, understand why it's there. It's not there for fun.
They're not going joyriding.
They're not joyriding. They're not there to piss you off because they woke up in a bad mood and they wanted to make you angry. They're there because somebody, at the end of the day, a consumer of some kind, either to their home or to a business that they patronize, but a consumer decided to purchase a product, and the truck is delivering that product to them. That's it. That's as simple as it could possibly be. That's why a truck is there on the road. They are only following demand. So we're not seeing demand change anytime soon. In fact, we actually project to see a pretty significant freight increase over the next 20 years. The latest number I heard was like 68% freight increase, which is massive. And so to your point about, it's like, you're gonna, the notion of chasing warehousing out of New York City, out of the areas where the most consumers actually are, well, their demand and their purchasing choices are only increasing. They're changing a little bit, but the totality of the freight is only increasing. You are going to put so much wear and tear on our road system, on our sort of logistical supply chain system. It's going to cost a fortune to have this stuff shipped. And all the while, you're not solving the problem you think you are. You're basically just pushing it further and further out. And I think that, and it goes to some of the smaller vehicles, right? You're talking about really, really efficient vehicles. They're clean, they're safe, whether they're electric or not, they're clean, they're safe. They're not as complicated to use as some of the bigger trucks, which means there's a great workforce development opportunity so that companies can hire people from the local communities, hire people who, college may not be the right fit for them. But these are family-sustaining careers if you drive a commercial vehicle. It's really, really great pay. You're not trapped in the debt cycle. You are able to start working at a younger age.
As are the warehouse jobs.
Exactly,
Yeah.
as are the warehouse jobs. And it's just like, and again, I'm not saying, this is not me saying don't go to college, work in a warehouse. This is me saying that it's a good opportunity for a whole lot of people, and we are doing ourselves a disservice if we discourage that, which frankly, we have discouraged the trades for so long in this country. We see the results right now. Good luck paying less than $500 for a plumber. Because they can, because that's where the demand is. And this is what we're saying with the freight network. There's a demand for drivers. We are in a shortage right now when it comes to commercial drivers, commercial technicians. I think warehousing, we're going to see a lot more need in warehousing too, whether they kick it out of the city or not. But if they do kick it out of the city, the shipment costs are going to increase. The vehicle miles traveled is going to increase.
Windshield time increases.
Exactly. And it's just like, for what? The product is still getting to you. The product is still going to come. You kick out a warehouse, the delivery is still going to be made. It's just going to be more of an environmental and economic cost.
Right. Consumers pay more for goods, it takes longer to receive them, and they are in transit for a longer time. So it's more wear and tear, it's negative impact.
Exactly. And I want to talk about what's actually in a warehouse, because this is one of my frustrations is people don't seem to understand the industry, right? They see an Amazon or UPS truck in their neighborhood, and they'll see a 53-footer on the highway, and they'll think, well, that's trucking. And yes, of course, that's trucking, but that's the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to trucking than just those types of vehicles that you see on the road. The freight diversification is massive in this country. I mean, there are hundreds of different types of equipment that a trucking company could utilize. And so what you're going to be seeing, right, is if you pigeonhole this industry and you say, we don't like this, we don't want this, we're going to get rid of this. That's not the way the world works. That's not what's going to happen. But you're going to decimate these segments while making it even more challenging to get the thing that you want to get. And warehousing specifically, it's not just, you go on your phone and you go on Amazon and you get a package. That's not just what warehousing is. There are pharmaceuticals, there are medical supplies. There's, we have members that have warehousing with food, and they are getting food in the morning, and it's coming out to the consumer at night. It's just like, this is what feeds people. This is what clothes people. This is what sustains people who have a medical need or a health issue. This is all processed in a warehouse. And you want to move it further and further away? It's like, just as an example, right? Like, if you're a diabetic, do you really want that insulin to be further and further away from you on a daily basis? Like, do we really think this is a great idea? And if people are like, oh, well, you're being overly dramatic, I'll go to a warehouse. Talk to somebody who actually operates a warehouse of all the different products that they sort and store and ship. It's not just shampoo from Amazon.
Right. So you took the words right out of my mouth. We've spoken before, so spoiler alert. We know that we're on the same page here, but I use this term ad nauseum, the invisible backbone of the city. And it's funny because you started off that bit talking about consumerism, and we think, okay, people are buying, cheap goods, crap on their phone, they're going to buy it, they want their delivery, and then it's going to go in the garbage. But we're really forgetting about what makes the city run and how we function as, the biggest urban environment in the country.
I mean, let's put it this way, right? If you're not running around naked, if you have a place to sleep, if you are not starving, a truck is responsible for all of that. And if that goes away, we can see how things can really de-escalate quickly. And that, I think, might be the biggest frustration of all. I love how you phrased it. And it's just like, how an industry that everybody relies on for everything. In New York City, the statistic I just saw is about 96% of freight is delivered by truck. It used to be 90, so it's actually ticked up. And I know we are in really close collaboration with City DOT on some efficiency modes, be they micro hubs, be they blue highways. We talk about drones, which are all great, and we're supportive of, and we are very happy to build more and more efficiency into the freight distribution network, because 96% is a lot. It is very difficult to meet that demand, but everybody relies on it, and to be sort of treated as like the red-headed stepchild, no disrespect to people who are red-headed stepchilds, but like to be treated that way in city planning and policy planning, it's grotesque. Honestly, it is grotesque. We are too important to be treated this way.
So is it smoke and mirrors? Is it anywhere in the realm of reality that we can diversify in any way? As you said, towards blue highways,
Yes.
towards maybe readopting some rail freight, going a little bit old school. You know, drones are always going to be a problem in New York, but we know they're coming. You know, how can we diversify in a way that thinks about things holistically and incorporates, you know, the greater needs of everyone?
100%, and you nailed it. It's holistic solutions. What I would caution is this, and I've said this at City DOT meetings, so I'm not, speaking out of turn here. You have to look at this with the proper metric. I used the 96% number, which again is new. It used to be 90%. The national average for reliance on truck freight is about 72%. Based on what's going on in the economy and supply chain, it ticks up a point or up or down a point, but it's about 72%. So New York, there are people in New York City that want to phrase it as, we're going to get trucks off the road, which gives people an idea of something that's not really logistically feasible. So you're already setting yourself up for failure, while you're kind of insulting an industry that you need as a partner to do this. And again, that's not City DOT. They've been great partners, but the media puts things out there, and that's kind of what New Yorkers believe. The real way to look at this is efficiency in the system. I love your word, holistic efficiency in the system. Micro hubs can play a really important role. Blue highways can play a really important role. Overnight deliveries, really, really important role as part of a holistic network to get New York City's reliance on truck freight closer to the national average and to keep it there as this freight demand increases. That's how they fit into the system. So what are types of freight that can be utilized by cargo bikes or by quads? What sort of middle mile can move to the waterways or to rail? Where can drones fit into this? Who is able to receive deliveries off hours, and why aren't they doing it yet? These are the things that, from a freight mobility standpoint, need to and are going to be focused on. And if this is done the right way, while giving New Yorkers the honest, story, we can really get closer to that national average in New York City.
Are the end users, do they even have the infrastructure and the wherewithal to be nimble enough to pivot into, embracing these different various modes in order to comply with future regulations and kind of rebalance? I mean, if you think about nationally across the board, these are not issues, but groups can't just pivot and say, well, we do this in New York, we're going to do it everywhere. That doesn't really seem feasible.
And now we get to talk about the real estate part of it all, because one of the reasons why New York City is so much more heavily reliant on truck freight than everywhere else is because the square footage is so expensive that a retailer is not going to allocate storage space because they can't afford it. So rather than having a truck come and make a delivery 2-3 times a week and they store it, that truck needs to make that delivery every day. We have members that deliver 6 days a week to their customers because the customer relies on that truck for the storage and the distribution. That is a challenge that's not going to go away. Now again, maybe if the city is willing to allocate some space to things like micro hubs and blue highways, and we're not kicking out warehouses,
or just allow us to
yes.
continue to bring new supply into zoned,
yes, 100%.
as of right zoned areas.
100%. Then we can get there. But if the name of the game is square footage is just going to increase year over year over year, we're not going to utilize these solutions to their full capacity. We're still going to utilize them. They're not going to go away, but they won't, micro hubs, blue highways, they won't reach their full potential.
Right. And we look at balance sheets all day long. Retailers are a great example. Again, you think New York, you think everyone's selling expensive stuff, but the reality is most are really low margin goods. It's really not feasible to have big box warehousing in the boroughs of New York City at these economics. Even in New Jersey on a national level compared to rates across the country, it's incredibly expensive. Big box distribution does have to go further away.
No, that's absolutely it. And now you're really starting to squeeze new development too, right? Where the financing might say, well, I want a brand in there. Like They want
corporate credit.
Exactly.
It's the only way it works.
Exactly. And so it's just so now you have developers that are kind of stuck with, well, this is what we have to build. This is the only way we can get something built, so we have to do it this way.
And the smaller you build, the more expensive it is to build on a per square foot basis. So
exactly. And let's be honest too, right? The zoning is a really big component of it. And so I know, we mentioned City of Yes earlier. We know there was some controversy with City of Yes. The only aspect of City of Yes that we as a trade group commented on was the neighborhood distribution centers, which we think are a really intriguing idea. We've actually been asking for this for a while, which is just we have empty retail. And when I say empty, I mean empty for a significant period
Several
of time.
years.
Exactly, not like a quick turn. Exactly.
Again, we talk about unintended consequences of vacant retail. I don't want to go too far off on a tangent, but we all know what happens when you have vacant storefronts and scaffolding for years and years. It's not good for anyone.
100%. And so we're just hold on a second. You want us to utilize cargo bikes and quads more. You have this empty storefront. Find a way to convert it into distribution, into these sort of mini warehouses or neighborhood warehouses, whatever you want to call it. And this would open up so much. First of all, this right away, this opens up off-hour delivery, and it opens up cargo bike. Because if a truck driver just has to make a delivery to one spot and doesn't necessarily have to hit their 6 customers in the neighborhood, let's say 5 of whom cannot staff for off-hour deliveries, well then good. They can just make that one delivery off hours. They can, get in and get out before anybody knows what's going on. And then you could have a cargo bike company or a quad company load up and hit those, 6 retailers when they're open and able to take that delivery. It all services the neighborhood, right? It's all localized. It makes a lot of sense. And so my thing is, you kind of want to have your cake and eat it too, which is very unnecessary. You're trying to establish these neighborhood delivery zones or neighborhood distribution centers. That's a way to democratize the freight distribution network. You don't have to kick out the warehouses too. Let the warehouses stay and service what they need to service. And at the grassroots level, you could have these neighborhood distribution centers, and you will have then democratized the distribution network.
We started during the latter period of COVID seeing some alternative, micro delivery type concepts pop up in underutilized retail and, largely in the food space, right? Grocery type delivery, all of that. It was like a flash in the pan. It was everywhere. It was growing overnight, and then all of a sudden it went away as quickly as it came.
Yeah, exactly. And this is sort of the, first of all, it really frustrated us, which is just we've been asking for something. We're sort of, a legacy industry. And once again, you're giving away the store to this, sexy tech startup that probably isn't going to be here in a couple of years, and lo and behold, they're not. And that's another frustrating thing with New York City is they're because it's so big, they're not adoptable. Adaptable. There you go. I always mix it up. So you could have Uber that comes in, doesn't follow, TLC regulations, kind of takes over, and the city is slow to catch up. That's just, look, that's capitalism. That's not, a thing one way or another on Uber, but it's what happened. And there was a thought that they were going to do that too with those, food retailers. I think the money ran out quicker than they anticipated. Square footage in New York City, it'll do that to you. But
free capital went away.
Exactly, the free capital went away. And so it's just like, but again, the city wasn't flexible there. And they didn't see how this would actually be a better usage for your legacy supply chain until it was too late. And hopefully with the new zoning, we'll be able to get that back. I'm more optimistic. I think it's a really strong piece of our distribution network, or will be a strong piece of our distribution network. And this also ties into other things that the city is doing, like a industrial master plan, which they're working on now, truck route modernization, which they're working on now, the JFK redevelopment. We know LaGuardia was just redeveloped. So there's a lot coming online, from a distribution and shipment point of view that I think will be good for the city overall, but we're sort of in the messy middle of that right now.
For sure. Yeah, there's no question about that. It seems like, we're always in the messy middle of something.
Yeah.
And again, change is not, New York is always changing.
Mm-hmm.
It's an age-old story. I'm not the first person to say that. You're a multi-generational New Yorker. You live in Queens. You shared an interesting kind of anecdote with us when we were getting ready for this about, why the IBZs in New York City are where they are and how that came to be. And specifically because we've just finished talking about the food industry, Hunts Point Co-op. And again, why that came to be and what sort of the unintended consequences were of pushing everything into one area.
So, and Hunts Point, had, first of all, it all goes back to the theme of freight follows demand, right? So when things happen in zoning where you designate space for industrial business zones, that's where they're going to go. If you designated them in the heart of Manhattan, which, used to have the garment industry, that went away. Things change and sort of space is reallocated in a different way. And Hunts Point's a great example. Hunts Point was designated an industrial business zone, and there's a whole lot that goes on there, not just the food markets, but the food markets are the big one, and they're the big economic generator. Until about 20 years ago, there was a decision made to close the Fulton Fish Market in Manhattan and move it to Hunts Point, which had all food distribution now was going to be centralized in Hunts Point.
So produce,
meat, dairy,
everything.
The whole thing. They made some investments there, but that puts a lot more trucks on the road in that specific area. I think it's something like 4,500 in that neighborhood. And because there's so much produce going around, even with investment, space becomes limited. So what has to happen, also given the nature of food and how you can't really have it sitting around for that long.
We hope not.
We hope not. We need to have these refrigerated trailers running 24/7, and they're diesel powered. So you have 20 years of diesel-powered TRUs, so transportation refrigerated units, running in Hunts Point, which is already in an environmental justice community. We already added the 4,500 trucks. Now we're adding the TRUs, and that's sort of the transportation side of it, right? There's also the building side of it, where the homes were built in a way without proper sort of air and ventilation. So on a hot day, for example, a person who lives in that neighborhood will have to keep their window open to stay cool, in which case the fumes from the trailers that are running 24/7 are getting into their homes. So of course there's going to be a health impact. Of course there's going to be an air impact. But the thought that came after this already happened of, well, look at the trucks, these big, bad, dirty trucks, they're poisoning people in the Bronx. It's just like, time out for a second. You would be ignorant to say that there's not a correlation between diesel emissions and some health outcomes. Again, the industry has made terrific strides in that, but going on 20 years now, yeah, there's definitely an impact. You would be ignorant not to say that. At the same time, who is the one that determined that Hunts Point has to be this major distribution market? It wasn't the industry. The industry followed that demand, but we didn't do it.
We complied.
Exactly, we complied. Who's the one that said that, like, well, we could build X, we can make these facilities, to this specification, but for anything else, it's going to be, refrigerated trailers. that'll run on diesel. This is what the technology is. This is what we have to do. Improve technology, improve zoning standards, find a way to sort of spread out industrial, sure, but that's not what happened. And so, we're painted as the bad guys for basically operating in the way that we were told to operate. And that's the frustrating thing. That's not to say that, we should wash our hands of everything. That's not to say we shouldn't continue to engage in the community. We should continue to get as safe and efficient day over day as we possibly can. We absolutely should. That's our responsibility. But the notion that we made a decision to do this is what gets frustrating, because that's not the case.
By the way, same folks probably dictated that we're going to densify housing in this area that has, little to no green space and is lacking in amenities and not transit rich, et cetera.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And that's kind of that's kind of the thought process too, of just like, well,
this is the tail wagging the dog here.
Exactly. And now it's just like, well, now we also have an affordable housing problem in this city. Of course,
no question about it.
And it's just like, well, so, good luck renovating all this stuff. And then part of that is also, I don't remember, the Fulton Fish Market moving, I know was, I think it was 2005. It was around that time. I don't know exactly when a lot of the sort of reclaiming waterfront property happened, but it happened where people were just like, this is pretty beautiful over here. Why are we having these industrial companies take up this waterfront property? We should really build this into mixed use. Of course, it's mixed use. It's higher end. It's not really affordable or necessarily market rate. So now we're sort of pushing industrial, like we're encroaching on industrial, and we're putting in these sort of luxury buildings. And wouldn't you know it, people who could afford to live in luxury buildings with waterfront views don't love trucks driving through their neighborhood. Even though, again, it wasn't their neighborhood, it was our neighborhood, and then you took space away and gave it to them without making accommodations for us, and we're the bad guys encroaching on their space.
Right. So the M zones have drastically decreased by way to, as is needed, allow for more housing redevelopment, which in turn has created more demand for transit-oriented and trucks, freight, et cetera.
Exactly. And so now we basically have to live in conflict instead of a collaboration, which, again, hopefully between the truck route redesign and the industrial master plan, we'll have better guidance moving forward, and everybody will have the space they need, within reason, because there's never going to be enough space in New York City. But again, it's just like, the city is sort of playing catch up, and we're the ones caught in the middle.
So while we're on hot and contentious topics right now, congestion pricing. Again, MTA needs it. City needs fewer civilian vehicles coming in and out of Manhattan every day. But what are the unintended consequences for your members who, as we all know, they're not the big corporate names. A lot of these are small operators. They have a fleet that can, a handful of vehicles. What is going on, and what on the administrative background really happens when congestion pricing is in effect?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and there's so many components to this that people just don't realize. And even what you said about the industry, I think it's between 90 and 95% of the industry are small companies, family-owned and operated.
95% of the industry are small operators. These are small businesses. They're family-owned. These are people's livelihoods. They're not, giant evil conglomerates.
Exactly. They can't just write a check and be done with it. So congestion pricing. First and foremost, we are not ideologically opposed to congestion pricing. We understand that there are benefits to it if done as part of a holistic traffic management plan. That's not what New York City did. New York City did a funding program for the MTA, which we could spend a whole podcast talking about the mismanagement at the MTA and how, I'm not convinced they have a money problem.
You need another host for that podcast. I'm not touching that one.
I'm not convinced they have a money problem. I'm convinced they have a management problem. But either way, this is a new funding mechanism for them. Here's the thing, though. Trucks are non-discretionary travel. We talked about it multiple times here. Freight follows demand. So a truck has to go make that delivery at the time that their customer demands that delivery happen. So that's why, again, trucks are in the zone. So the way New York set up congestion pricing is trucks or commercial vehicles are the only class of vehicle that's charged per trip instead of per day. And again, this is not some like bridge or tunnel crossing. This is an arbitrary line down the middle of Manhattan. The only class that's charged per trip and at higher rates. So small trucks are charged like a $14 and change, and larger trucks are charged $21 and change per trip. So already this is a massive burden on us that don't have we can't use public transportation. You can't haul freight on the subway, at least you really shouldn't. And we have to go when our customers demand it. So that's one problem, the expense of it and just the unfair way we're treated. But then congestion pricing took hold in January. And we noticed, because of the per trip charge and the different rates, that commercial vehicles can be charged, it is an administrative nightmare to go through your tolling statements and figure out where exactly you crossed, what vehicle exactly it was that crossed, and if they charged that vehicle the proper rate. So some companies have dedicated a staff person to, a couple times a month, really with a fine-tooth comb, go over and audit and call the MTA. And what we've been hearing is the MTA has been responsive to making tolling change, the invoice changes when it was brought to their attention. But it is a long time to look at that, to do the calculations, to be on hold with the MTA, to hope you get the right person who could help you. Most companies can't dictate that staff person, so they're just paying it. So they are paying toll rates that they shouldn't, or they're allocating resources to audit this that should be deployed elsewhere. But either way, it is another administrative burden on an industry that I'm so glad you mentioned is really small businesses for the most part.
Zach, I think we're just about at time. I think you and I could sit here and talk all day long about this. Anything else for the audience that you want to leave with today about, the trinity of T's here, trucks, transportation, and tolls?
I think if there's one takeaway, it's just like, if you see a truck, just understand why it's there. Don't get frustrated or, don't think they're doing something to try to have a negative impact on you. They're only there to service. They're there to service their customers and the community, and it would be great if you could just view them in a different light.
Zach, appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for coming out today, and look forward to future collaboration with you.
Absolutely.
Let's do that ending. Could you be like, hey Zach, if anybody wants to get in touch with you.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Let's just do that last part one more time, and we're good.
Zach Miller, Transportation Association of New York. Anyone in our audience today that wants to get in touch with you, that needs advocacy, that wants to learn a little bit more about the work you're doing, how can they get in touch with you?
You could reach me directly, Zach, Z-A-C-H, at nytrucks.org. You could check out our website, nytrucks.org, or you could give me a call, 718-309-4564.
Zach, thanks again for coming out. Really look forward to working with you.
Likewise.